Okay, I think we're ready to start. Hi there, everybody. Thanks for coming by and taking time to watch this video. My name is Carlita, and I'm a wildlife biologist and ecologist, a teacher, an author. I've been a podcaster and an environmental journalist and project developer. I've worked in Central and South America for about 15 years. And after having to leave Ecuador because my life was in danger and also my husband's life was in danger. And although I've lost him as well already, he died about a year and a half ago. I'm here to talk today about my experiences with depression and with grief, and to share with you a fresh perspective on depression that you don't really hear these days. And I think it's important to take into account, obviously, different factors cause depression in different people. And I think it's a good idea to look at the environmental factors and aspects of depression, and also understand why, because of the rise in depression, what is really causing this? You know, what is this phenomenon of the rise in depression when we're supposedly developing civilization to become more comfortable, easier with technology and technological development. Therefore, you need to know a little bit about me and my background. And I'm doing this because my new book is coming out this year in a couple of months. It's called Surviving Depression in a Depressing World. And the title itself is kind of a way to make people really accept that, you know, the world is not right, and it's also incorrect to expect people to not be affected by what is unfolding around us all over the planet with environmental destruction, constant wars and injustices, you know, the existence of modern day slavery, child trafficking, and a constant exploitation of the environment, pollution of our oceans, plastic in the oceans, forest fires, forests being destroyed for oil. So it's all extremely depressing. And anybody that does not emotionally react to what's happening around us, then I would say they're the people that have mental problems, and not people who are being affected and feeling overwhelmed about the current environmental crisis. Here's my last book, which I wrote in 2015, I think, 2015. And it's called The Environmental Crisis is a Crisis of Human Consciousness, the Silent Ecocide. The environmental crisis is a crisis of human consciousness. So this current book that's coming out, Surviving Depression in a Depressing World, it really goes into the ecology of depression and the effects of different environmental influences on the human body and mind, and also really going into why being disconnected from nature actually affects us mentally in a very drastic way. But also, while following various stories and examples of that all over the world, I also go into showing the reader why we physically need and benefit from being physically interactive and connected to nature every day, or as much as we can. So I hope that this book will really help a lot of people and bring some answers, not just on that level, but also we go into providing dietary advice for people suffering from depression, various health hacks that I include, and also ways to just better manage your lifestyle, your mind, your body, your health, and so on. And a lot of solutions for alternative treatments aside from normal allopathic medicine, which I do believe helps people when they are really very desperate. Although I want to help people who have had enough of mainstream allopathic medicine and want to move to something more manageable and longer sustainable and not damaging to the organs if practiced in the long term. So it's a very detailed book, and I also share my story in this book, which I think I need to talk about so you get a good idea of what my life has been like, because I really have not led a very normal or conventional life. So this is my chance to really open up to my audience and even my friends and my family like I never have done before. So here we go. So my background is that I was from the UK. I was from London originally, and I was an only child, and when I was a child, we had a very challenging time because we moved around quite a lot, my mother and me. She was a single parent, so we had to move a lot. And for British citizens, I guess we were on a very, very poor budget because we didn't really have any support financially, and mum wasn't working a lot of the time. She was just taking care of me. So I had a lot of different experiences in different parts of the UK as a child, and I went to a number of schools and experienced some real challenges there, which affected me even further because I had Asperger's, and I wasn't diagnosed until this year. So what is Asperger's? Asperger's is a kind of autism. It means that you're on the autism spectrum, although you may be higher functioning than other autistic people. You have movement of your arms and your legs, and you're able to do some neurotypical things and cope, and in some ways you cope and other ways you don't. The worst part of it is really social interaction. It's very challenging for autistic people because when you're in a public place, for example, you are overwhelmed by all the noises and stimulation around you. It's quite hard to follow what people are saying or understand conversational cues that most neurotypicals do follow. So along with being autistic or having Asperger's, high functioning autism, is that you suffer from a lot of anxiety, acute anxiety, especially with reference to socializing. So I had that going on at the time when I was a child, and I didn't even know it, because as a girl, it's harder to be diagnosed with autism. Boys tend to be more obvious, whereas girls can hide it a bit easier. So there was that going on, which caused extra problems for me, with dealing with school and so on. And then when I was 14 years old, it was discovered that I had tumors. I had a small tumor, maybe just about this big, in my lower jaw. It was growing in my jaw mandible. And I was only 14 at the time. And I went to hospital to have it taken out. And they said that it was like gristle cells growing in the bone, so it was out of place. It was odd. And I remember it during my operation. I actually had an out-of-body experience, and I was taken out of my body by another being, and I saw as I came out my body that my mouth was clamped open, and I had two surgeons, and I think they were talking about golfing, their golfing weekend. And I was quite annoyed that they weren't focusing on me, and they were having this conversation, but they were focusing on me. This was during the surgery. So I remember that, and then I rose up out of the hospital roof with this being, and this being by me, she had the kind of feeling of being feminine. She was kind of white, glowing person, spirit, soul. And she took me to the universe. I found myself in space with stars all around me. And I saw this big grid in front of me. And the grid had woven threads that created a crisscross pattern, sort of like that, like a chessboard. But there were no black and white. It was just made with golden thread. And you could see the universe above and below. And on various squares floated above these spheres. There were these milky white spheres above the squares. And I was taken into different ones by this being. And I remember seeing different parts of my life that played themselves out, scenarios that played themselves out. And I was experiencing past events, present and future events. I remember seeing a lot of future events and knowing that I was seeing my future. These were just random situations. A lot of them felt very normal, like not really that special. But going in them made me experience the things that other people said and did around me, or whatever I said and did or caused them to feel. So it was kind of like a life review, past life review, and a future life review in the universe. So after that, I remember coming back down into my body, and I remember reflecting back on that after I was recovering from the surgery. And I remember I actually talked to my biology teacher about this. And he said, well, you don't go to sleep when you're under anesthetic. Your brain doesn't sleep. You can still have an experience like that, but it doesn't mean you're dreaming. That wasn't a dream. The part of your brain that dreams is switched off, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a conscious experience outside of your body. And he was quite an interesting man, because as a biologist, I expected him to be very, very close to anything challenging to biology. But he was a really open-minded person, and he explained to me, I think in the best way he could, that there was consciousness outside of the physical realm. He was quite a forward-thinking teacher. I think I was quite lucky to speak to him, and he made me realize that my experience was unusual but valuable, and it wasn't me dreaming. And so after that, I just, got on with things, but I had a bit more of a feeling for the multidimensional realms that are in existence around our physical world and accessible to us in various ways. So I think that was a very pivotal experience for me when I was 14. After that, when it got to art school, I had another tumor. This time it was growing in my nasal cavity, and it was about that big, so about the size of a tangerine, rather than that big. So the surgery was quite complicated, and by this time I was told that I was a medical anomaly, because both these tumors were benign. They were not cancerous. However, it didn't mean any difference to me, because the rate that they were growing was quick, and they could still cause me injury. They were still dangerous to me. So I was a medical anomaly, because most people don't have benign tumors grow back in different places. But as it turns out, after this second one, I've had 3 more. And the last one was really big. I mean, we're talking about this big. And that one was growing in my womb, in my uterus. And I remember the doctor then, she was a gynecologist in Ecuador, and she said, it's a miracle that you're able to walk and do all the things you can do with this inside of you. I don't know how you've had it for so long. And that one was crushing my kidneys and my organs. So going back to the second one I had here, which was growing in my nasal cavity, that was also involved in my jaw, the top part of my jaw this time, not the bottom over here. So I had part of that jaw taken away. So one side of my face is a bit slimmer than the other, because there's no jaw there. And I had to go on a liquid diet for 11 months, almost a year, actually. So it was quite an experience. At that time, I was, I think, maybe in my early 20s, 21, 22, or 23 or 24. Forgive me if I don't know quite how old I was exactly at the time. But Yeah, I was in my early 20s, we can just say. So to go on a liquid food diet forcefully for a year, 11 months, and on the 12th month I started eating a little bit of soft food again and again. The reason being is because the jaw needed time to recover in order for me to be able to open my mouth. So I couldn't open my mouth very much since I had part of it taken away and it needed to heal. I just couldn't, so I could barely open it enough to take a bite out of anything really small. So it was quite something to be on liquid food for a year. I got very sensitive to energy vibrations, and I could feel the vibrations coming from plants. And I think that the reason being is because I was on this liquid food and I was juicing and not having any solid food. So that experience is something I had to try and make something constructive out of, because it was quite intense and it required me to take time out from my studies and from any career, whatever the illusion of a career is, prospects, or getting on with my education in that way for those purposes. So I had to take a year out and just focus on healing. I decided to give up art because I was going to art school at the time, and I started looking into environmental science, and I went to study environmental science and wildlife biology because that's something I'd always wanted to do. And that led me to eventually going forward to Ecuador and Guatemala and Ecuador in my 30s. When I was in my early 30s, I set up a non-profit organization which sent volunteers out to do projects in Central and South America and also in Asia. And I invited my friends at the time on board, people who I trusted, that I had met from Greenpeace activism groups and from university, to be fellow directors of my NGO. And one year when I was in Guatemala, where I was working on the front side of the projects, bringing volunteers in to do teaching in the poor schools in Lago Atitlan, in collaboration with the Suicidal Center in San Pedro, for Manuel, who was Suicidal. That's the indigenous language that they spoke there in San Pedro, La Laguna, Guatemala. We worked with 2 Mayan schools, and we mostly did workshops with children using ecology and art and English to get them interested in and learning about ecology and the environment. So we were doing environmental education. So, and there were various other projects, environmental conservation projects in Ecuador afterwards that I developed later. So that was one of the projects we were doing. And I remember one time in Guatemala, it was around Christmas, I think, I got septicemia, blood poisoning. And I didn't know that I was sick at the time, and I almost died. in a hostel in Guatemala when I was on my way traveling to Antigua at the time to have a holiday, a much needed holiday. But instead I got sick with septicemia, and luckily a friend helped me and saved me and took me to hospital. And I was overdosing on painkillers and I didn't know it at the time. And then sometime after that, when I did get better, I went to the UK again, and that's when I had my NGO taken away from me by the people I trusted and invited on board. So that was quite a devastating experience. But I was told by some other people who've set up non-profit organizations and charities that it's actually common for the people that they bring in to mutineer against them and hijack it and take it over because they want to take it a different way. And I just wanted to keep it political rather than turn it into a charity. So anyway, moving on from that, it taught me a lot. I didn't trust people after that at all. And I also learned working in the NGO sphere that it's very competitive and it's very hard to get people to collaborate with you, even if you're all working towards the same goals, such as saving the rainforest or raising environmental awareness. And that really frustrated me because, you know, it just shows you the kind of mentality people are at, and that, you know, thinking in a competitive and capitalistic way does not help us build communities. We need to be a bit more focused on the cause rather than precious about our organizations or projects and so on. So that's my view on that today after my experiences. Anyway, moving on from there, I worked from 2011 in Ecuador and started forming alliances with different indigenous groups in the Ecuadorian Amazon to help them with different projects. I had left behind that experience with the NGO and the people who weren't worth any more attention, and just moved on my own, taking my projects with me. And it was a while before I really got back on my feet, though, because they denied I ever even owned the NGO and carried some of the debts. Afterwards, it took me probably about 3 or 4 years to get my life sorted out again. So anyway, in Ecuador in 2011, I started getting to know Ecuador and Ecuadorian people and the Amazon and the problems that people were faced with there, and really getting to learn so much about it. Really understanding the plight of the Amazon, which actually you can read about in my first book here if you're interested, The Silent Ecocide. And then also finding out about the solutions, you know, some of the energy solutions to the problem of using the rainforest to extract petroleum and things like that. So in 2015, I had one of my last big tumor. I've missed out a few I've had before. One I had on the back of my head as well. When I had that one removed, the anesthetic didn't work, so I went into shock on the operating table when they were operating on me with that one, and I was shaking really badly because I could feel everything, and they wouldn't stop the pain. That was in London. And then the one I had in 2015 was the really, really big one. I could probably show you, but it's quite shocking. So I won't. I've got a photo of it here, but I often look at to remind myself how lucky I am to be alive. Because my surgeon was holding it like this with two hands, because she needed two hands, and it was like a baby, an ugly baby. So I had like 18 stitches and a big scar from my belly button all the way down. And I don't think I've ever really physically recovered my strength from that operation. I still have a lot of pain today in my lower spine, and when I get up, because I've got so much scar tissue in there. And at the time I was recovering, I was completely on my own, isolated in the forest with 5 rescue dogs and 6 rescue cats, because people kept dumping dogs and cats in my forest garden. And just before that operation, I thought I was actually not going to survive the operating table. So that's actually how this book came about, because I wanted to get everything that I had experienced down on paper and to share it, mainly to share what I've learned and what possible solutions there could be to the environmental problems, and what's driving these environmental problems as well. But yeah, after that massive operation, again, I survived. Oh, so between that and the time I had septicemia, I also got malaria in 2012, and I was in hospital for a couple of weeks in Ecuador after getting malaria, which I survived. And I just, again, I'm so lucky. Septicemia, malaria, tumors, 5 tumors in different places. Although I'm a medical anomaly, none that as yet have been completely fatal, except the last one almost killed me. But somehow, by miracle, as my surgeon said, I was a walking miracle. I'm still here. So that was 2015, and then it was after that I met my late husband, who was this just incredibly amazing soul, very clever, intelligent, wonderful man who spoke 4 languages and had won awards in maths, and was just a really gentle, funny person as well, very intelligent. Anyway, I won't go into the details on that, because all of this is quite recent, but he was kidnapped and brutally tortured 3 times in Ecuador, and falsely imprisoned on charges he shouldn't have been put away, because he was already fragile mentally. And I had to fight for him, get him out, and various other things happened. So I did everything I could to help him. And a year and a half ago, he still died. So I have been through such a great deal, so many traumatic things, and there's a list of many more. I've been homeless, I've been completely broke, I've been totally isolated, and as well as having septicemia, malaria, and all these tumors, and falling in love, meeting my soulmate, and then having them taken away from me, or seeing them being tortured. These are not normal experiences for the average person. And I really have no idea why I went through all of that and why I'm still here. So again, in the manner of sublimating hugely intensive traumatic experiences and trying to make sense of it all for the benefit of others, because right now, there's no benefits for me, but other people can learn maybe some information that I have to share in my new book, Surviving Depression in a Depressing World, an Ecological Perspective. So I'll be sharing more in this space soon. Also, you can look down below in the links and follow my environmental blog, and just email me if you feel that this recording, sharing my experiences and really opening up to people like I never have before, has helped you in any way. And if you want to reach out to me and want me to keep you updated with my book and how to learn the art of living again, then please do contact me. Be happy to talk to you. Because what I really truly have experienced through all of this is a shaping of my soul and my inner world in ways that make me far more authentic and far more humble, I guess, and than I could have ever been before. And what I feel is, if I can offer an ecological perspective on the aspects of depression, as well as advice and tips on how to learn the art of living again after you yourself feel suicidal. If I can help share my experiences on how to recover from deep trauma of any kind, whether you're a war veteran, I have had a glimpse of through what my husband went through, and how PTSD has affected me, having those recycling thoughts and things like that. There are various things you can do that I talk about in my book when you're depressed, when you're grieving, or when you're experiencing shock and trauma. These kind of experiences make us feel that we really don't want to be here anymore. And we have to start from scratch when we're there at the bottom. Well, as they say, when you're at rock bottom, there's really no further down to go. That's the upside. The upside of being at the lowest of the low is that you can't go any lower. And I always used to say, well, actually, I have gone lower this time. No, it's this time I've gone lower. Oh my God, no, this is really the lowest of the low. So I know what it's like to go through hellfire and back, and experience the deepest fears and live them, and when they become true, and having to survive that takes a great deal of strength. Just learning to breathe through each moment and put one foot in front of the other, especially after shock and grief, really takes so much emotionally. And the pain you carry makes you completely blind to your environment and everything around you, and you just become completely consumed by the pain of that grief, of that loss. And getting back from that deep, dark hole is a very long journey, and it requires learning to nurture oneself, learning to be patient with oneself as well as others. Of course, you know, we lose every limit that we've had before because our boundaries have been so pushed beyond belief already. But more importantly, learning the art of living again when you've experienced the worst possible things that could have ever happened. And learning the art of living is learning to take care of yourself. It requires a bit of self-education and understanding. That's why I discuss the ecology of the human body. It requires positive habit forming and keeping up a discipline, and more importantly, the biggest key to the art of living again is really practicing gratitude. And I don't mean in the way that you hear everybody talking about this. I mean in a way that as a total reality check, when you really have lost everything, it's very, very hard to even feel gratitude for anything. So you have to start off just going through the motions. And then something happens and it changes and it becomes slowly more and more and more authentic. You do start feeling, genuinely feeling that gratitude returning. And the more you have, it starts to ignite sparks of hope in you as well. And just as that gets stronger and stronger and stronger, it helps you define a new way of living around the pain that you carry. Because, you know, as somebody who doesn't just suffer from depression, but as a grieving widow, I know what it's like to carry a huge burden of depression and grief. Grief like nothing anyone has ever felt before, and the first time you experience it, it's so painful, it physically hurts, and you feel like you can barely breathe every day. Breathing is hard work. So when you've been through that, you really, really have to carefully nurture the art of living again and practicing gratitude. And it slowly starts to grow and sprout like a tiny little shoot from a seed, and it starts to grow into a plant. And then it gets bigger and bigger and grows into a big tree. And that's when you become a bit more empowered and you're able to start managing not just your day-to-day self-care, but start to take changes with your environment, make positive changes. Start to take care of your environment, start to clean up a bit, not just clean yourself up, but clean your environment up and get out of that grief hollow hole or the grief cave that, you know, we end up in, and start to get a bit more active and outside into the world doing things again. So that's as much as I can give. Again, it's a way of me sublimating my horrific experiences and wanting to share and reach out with others. Hopefully I can benefit other people, or my experiences can benefit other people, and all my health hacks and health hack tips in my book will help other people as well to better manage their depression or their grief. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me and my story. My story isn't me. I don't feel that I deserve any pity or anything like that. That's not why I'm sharing my story. I'm not the kind of person who identifies deeply with the past or me being a victim of any sort or anything like that. I don't see anything in that respect. I think what's important is understanding that we're all just part of consciousness and a bigger expansion of energy. And my past experiences is not my identity. It's just what I've experienced as a human being on this planet. And I know so many other people who've had just far worse experiences and daily living in hell. So I'm not here to try and get pity or to use that as a way to say, well, this is what I've been through, so you can do it too, you can survive this. But mainly just to open up a bit and tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, what I have been through in the past, so that we're on the same page, because we're all human at the end of the day. And anybody that tries to sell you a cure for anything or a solution for depression, you have to be quite wary of them. I don't believe there is any one solution, because depression is very complex, and everyone has different reasons and different experiences why they're depressed or why they're going through what they're going through. And our biological makeup is completely different, chemically, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So it's really about just meeting you at a human level, but also sharing what I feel from an ecological perspective and a human's perspective, looking at the bigger picture of what's going on all over the world. Why has depression risen in the last 20, 30, 50 years so exponentially? And also, why are 1 million people around the world committing suicide? And it's because of our disconnection from nature. So we need to reestablish that connection to nature, and to each other, to our communities, and treat this in a way that is ecological perspective. The human ecology and the environmental ecology are one and the same. We're completely connected. And you'll see why when I explain the energetic aspects of that, as well as the physical and environmental influences. So again, thank you so much for listening. I really am going to wrap this up now. And I hope that this year, 2020, brings you positive solutions and some abundance and joy in your life. If you need to email me or want to sign up to know when my book is out, please email me with your email, and I'll keep you up to date, and you can follow me here as well. Thank you. Bye.